and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Okay, so we're going to do the news. We're going to do it a little bit different. I'm stuck in a hotel room. What do they call it? Unplugged? Yes, Alejandro, Unplugged. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. So you had a UFO story that you were telling when nobody was hearing. So let's hear that.
Okay. I'm going to move to a different one and then go back to that one.
Okay.
Just to mix it up. This is a new one. Okay, so this is a MUFON sighting submitted to us by Roger Marsh. So the director of communication for MUFON, who writes for us about some of the good stories going on. This event took place on September 10th at 3:45 p.m. It was a cloudless blue sky when this gentleman and his wife saw something weird in the sky. They thought it might be a satellite, but it was actually during the day. So he and his wife were able to get a video camera and a binoculars or even a telescope to train on this object. And you can hear them, unlike a recent UFO video where the guy was not being very nice to his girlfriend. Yeah. This is a nice couple where he's being really nice. He's like, all right, baby, yeah, you're smart. You got it together. So he's complimenting her a lot. So that was nice to hear. But the video does show a white object. You can't tell necessarily what the movement is. The gentleman said it was kind of standing still, but in the video he said it moved around. And they felt it was triangular in shape. In the video it does seem kind of like it's changing shape. And one of the close-up pictures, it does look triangular. So it's possible it was a grouping of balloons or something like that. In fact, this person said it did seem like there were multiple colors, although the video you just see white. But it's not completely typical. They saw this moving around, and then it moved at an angle before kind of flying off. And it took about 10 minutes for them to see this thing, and they recorded a couple minutes here, which they submitted to MUFON, and you can see it here in the video. It was being investigated by one of the MUFON guys, Chief Investigator Marianne Snyder. She was unable to identify necessarily what it was. Her best guess was it was a UAV, and I think that's what she finally chose as the disposition. But she did rule out the ISS and other satellites. But I don't even know that you can see the ISS during the day. I don't think you can.
I don't think so either.
I doubt it.
No.
Yeah. I mean, it's super bright at night, and it's a sight to see at night, that's for sure, but not during the day. So this was kind of a weird one. So people can check that out at the site. But this is the exciting one. This is one that that I think is really cool. And did you enjoy it when I told the story last time, Martin?
No, yeah.
Okay. You were going to say something funny.
I'm just giving you a hard time. Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is a good one, I think. This is written by Philip Mantle. So he just sent this story in, and it was pretty much this season that reminded him of this whole incident. He sent this in, and he says it's his favorite UFO investigation ever. So pretty cool. He says he heard about this story on Friday the 13th in October of 1986. Ooh. And he was doing a Halloween kind of interview. And somebody called him He was actually investigating with Mark Birdsall. That's who his buddy was, he investigated with this. Her name was Mrs. Westerman, and she reported that actually in the summer of 1979, she had a very odd experience. Her and her children and others, there was in total something like 7 or 8 witnesses to this event. When she got involved, she heard the kids talking about some sort of commotion, and she comes out back, and there is this kind of dome-shaped object in the middle of this big field behind their homes. She didn't know what was going on. It looked like there were some people in front of it. She walked back to the back fence of the yard to get a closer look to see what these people were doing. These people then, 3 individuals, looked like 3 men, kind of walked behind the object, and then the object lifted up and shot up into the sky. And it's your typical saucer-looking thing. So really strange. These men were dressed in outfits that were metallic type of silver from head to toe. She said that when they did move, there were creases in it, so she could see that much. She thought they were people. She assumed they were just regular people until this thing lifted up and shot off. And what was strange about it as well is that, it did have to at least negotiate some high-power wire lines that were are in the area above this field. So Phil and Mark then did interviews with the witnesses, including the children. They found out that the children actually saw this object land and then saw these people come from behind it. And then, when their mom came out, they went back to the other side of it, and then the object took off. They felt all of these people were very credible. They've talked to them throughout the years, and they've maintained their story, and it's something that was a big deal. They kind of described the object as a Mexican hat, which is not uncommon of a description for saucer-shaped objects. We hear that quite a bit, actually.
Sombrero.
So it was Yeah, sombrero. So it was really strange, and that is really saying something that, Philip Mantle would say this is his strangest case because he's been investigating for decades. He's an expert out there in the UK. He's written several books. Some of his latest books have been written with Paul Stonehill, including the last one, Russian USO Cases. So Paul Stonehill is actually going to be at the UFO Congress with your guests tonight. We'll all be there to talk UFOs. So Paul Stonehill will be talking about these Russian cases. But really cool case. I was really happy. Philip Mantle's been submitting stories for us to post in the last few weeks. He's done this periodically in the past, but now he's doing it more regularly. And so does Paul Stonehill. But there's some really cool cases, so this is a good one.
That is a good one.
Good.
And I really did mean that. I mean, before when you asked me if I liked it, I was joking. This is a really good case, actually.
I could tell because you were hesitant, and because you're a nice guy, you don't want to commit to the teasing, but I can take it.
Yeah, okay.
I've gotten criticized for how much I give it to you, so.
I know. Unjustly, though. All right. Hey, you wrote the one of the forwards in this the book that we're talking about tonight, and that book is called Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers by Stanton, Friedman, and Kathleen Marden.
Oh, wow. If I had written a foreword, that would, especially to a book from these two, that would be a huge deal. I would be done. That would be my mic drop, because that would be perfect.
You wrote a review or something.
I did get to write a little review, which I am still extremely flattered. I was so happy that they asked me to do that because they're two of my favorites. So luckily, we've been lucky enough to have them come to the last few UFO Congresses, and this year they're going to both be speaking. So that'll be really exciting. And
excellent.
So it's really exciting.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much,
We're looking
Alejandro.
forward to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it'll be fun as usual.
And it'll be warm instead of the way it is here.
Yep, you'll be able to go to the pool or the hot tub. I don't know that I've seen you at the hot tub before, though, Stan.
Well, I don't know how to swim.
Oh, well, the hot tub's very shallow, so we'll have to try that out this year. Nice and relaxing.
Okay.
All right, Alejandro, thanks so much.
All right, talk to you guys later. Have a good show.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care. Well, Stan and Kathleen, thanks so much for joining us. I was pleased to get your book in the mail and read through. I think I mentioned to you, Kathy, that I'm a slow reader, but I got to page like 190-something in the last few weeks. So really, really enjoyed this book and would like to talk to you. I believe that everybody that listens to the show knows who you are. But just in a quick nutshell, Kathleen, you are the niece of Betty Hill, and you've been heavily involved in abduction research, and you actually represent, I forget what it's called, in MUFON. Can you just tell the listening audience a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm the director of MUFON's Experiencer Research Team, and we are the arm of MUFON that speaks to experiencers in a non-judgmental manner. We will participate with field investigators in doing investigations if they have an abduction investigation and want some help from us. And we make referrals to experiencers who are looking for support groups or for hypnotherapists. And we also do research. We have an ongoing questionnaire. It has 118 questions. It's called the Experiencer Survey, and it's on MUFON's main page at MUFON.com.
Now, how many people have partaken so far in this survey?
We have about 350 right now. We're looking for 500, and we'll end it at 500 and move on to phase 2 of it. We have two phases.
Someone was asking online, this question comes up quite a bit. Kathy, do you happen to know if either Betty or Barney had Rh negative blood type?
I know that Betty had, I think she had Rh positive. Okay. I'm not certain about Barney, but my research showed that the majority of experiencers have Rh positive blood types, but the Rh negative blood type is elevated among experiencers.
It's elevated in like a scale?
Yes,
on
relativities. The scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I know Nick Redfern did a little bit about that. It is pretty interesting. So, Stan, it seems like we don't really need you to introduce yourself, but but anyway,
you lost the sheet, huh?
Yeah, well, you've been on so many times on this. Plus, anytime anyone wants to watch anything on UFOs, there you are. I don't know how many films, documentaries, Larry King, you name it. I don't know how many you've been on. I don't know if you ever counted. Have you?
No, I haven't. After the first couple hundred, it gets to be, I won't say routine, but who's keeping score?
Yeah.
is my view. I will say it was 4 times on Larry King, not that much.
Yeah, those are great. And I really, there was some kind of gnarly skeptics or debunkers on those, but I recommend if anyone hasn't seen those, I think you can catch most of them on YouTube. A lot of the segments.
That's what people tell me. I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time with YouTube, but apparently I can find almost anything. Somebody turned up with one, and I said, gee, that doesn't look familiar. When he was describing it, and I didn't see it, I said, what color was my hair? Black. Oh, then I remembered. It was a show that had been done about 20 years earlier, when I was younger, obviously.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of stuff out there, and I really don't park myself in front of the tube to watch what I've been on. It's more fun to do other things. Yeah,
absolutely. So what inspired you to co-author this book?
Well,
either one of you can go.
Okay, I will go. Well, this dates all the way back to 2010. And Stan and I were talking about what our next book would be after Science Was Wrong. We thought that we wanted to write another one. And so we started talking about it, and Stan said that he really wanted to write something about Dr. Donald Menzel, the Harvard astrophysicist who was such a huge debunker. And I really wanted to include Philip Klass in the book and go to the American Philosophical Society, where Klass's archival collection is, and do a lot of research there, which I ended up doing. And so over time we discussed it, and finally, after 6 years of combined research efforts, we have the book.
Well, and I should add that not many books dig into the reality of the debunker crowd and the fact that something is fishy there. In other words, we have people who were too smart not to know that they were being deceptive, misleading, lying. Can I say that?
I do.
Well, and, part of our focus was on Dr. Edward U. Condon. As a physicist, I have to say he was a well-known, excellent physicist. But he directed the Condon study, the University of Colorado study, and came out with some things that were pretty darn strange, pretty stupid, frankly, which bugged me, because a physicist like had been president of the American Physical Society, president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. This is not a dink. And how I could say some of the things, Kathy, you probably know it better than I do. That quote about no alien life will be visiting for 10,000 years or something like that.
Yeah, see, that's what it was, Stan, is that we could not expect intelligent life from elsewhere to visit our solar system in the next 10,000 years.
How could someone come up with that?
Well, that's what we were curious about. I mean, there has to be some kind of explanation for such a stupid remark from such a smart guy. And Klass, I had run-ins with him, and there's no question that his debunking was unscientific, irrational, nasty, etc. And I still haven't found the smoking gun. I wonder if anybody listening to us happens to know some inside stuff about why or who Phil was working for to come up with so many irrational explanations and to be so nasty about it. And I got a kick out of Donald Trump calling Hillary Clinton, what were the exact words? She's so nasty, something like that.
I think he was talking about her campaign or something. I think I know what you mean.
Well, he said it. I saw him say it to her during the debate. But the thing is, it's hard to understand why Klass was so nasty to a lot of people. And so, look, he was the senior avionics editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology, a very respectable publication, and based in Washington. So he was the go-to man whenever the media needed somebody close by. Phil was there. But he said so many things that were so obviously nonsensical and nasty. And, I still don't know who he was working for, besides himself. But so one of the things about the book was we tried to cover ground that other people hadn't covered. I think that's a fair statement. In other words, it is not case after case. It's trying to understand some of the strange things that have happened with regard to how the media, how the scientific community, and others have dealt with this subject, certainly in an irrational fashion. I'm ashamed as a scientist, as a physicist, with some of the things that these guys have said. And with Klass's attacks on Dr. James E. McDonald, I knew Jim. I consider him the number one ufologist ever. And the dirty tricks that Klass tried to pull on him were really something else.
Yeah.
So these are things, you want to know why people who weren't stupid, why they took the attitudes they did, and at least demonstrate that what they said was irrational and nasty. And so we set out to try to cover some of that ground. And in looking back at the book, I think no other book covers the same ground. Do you think so?
No.
I don't think so.
One of the things I noticed is that the chapter on Philip Klass's, I think it's the longest one of all of them, isn't it? As far as like the debunker personalities.
Yes, there's more
really covered a lot
on Philip Klass's work. Yes, I did cover a lot, and he had very extensive files at his archival collection, and I was very, very surprised to learn that he had close connections, close relationships with people like Donald Menzel, with Edward Condon, with Robert Lowe, who was the project coordinator on the Condon Committee, and with Hector Quintanilla, who was the director of Project Blue Book from 1963 until 1970. And in Quintanilla's autobiography, I found a little paragraph where he thanked Philip Klass for his help on Project Blue Book. He also thanked Donald Menzel for his help. So here they were acting as unpaid advisors on Project Blue Book to debunk UFOs through deductive reasoning. It had nothing to do with the facts, but to dispense with the evidence, in other words.
Right.
Well, we did. I will say this: we didn't find anything as blatant as I found about Menzel. I mean, I had one run-in with the man. He wrote books in the 1950s, debunking books. His first book was translated into Russian. And here he was, he wound up being, after a while, head of the astronomy department at Harvard. And how does one explain that? So my discovery, which came as quite a shock to me at the Harvard archives, that he told Jack Kennedy in writing that he had a longer continuous association with the National Security Agency of anybody, 30 years. And when we are properly cleared to each other, I can tell you more. He thought that under Eisenhower, the NSA hadn't been treated properly. But who knew that Menzel, and I'm convinced, I was looking for work, looking for facts about Operation Majestic 12, and Menzel was listed, and at first the thought was, this is kind of a joke. How could he be one of 12 guys who were appointed by President Truman to really dig into flying saucers? And Menzel? Everybody else had a clearance. It was easy to establish that, a high-level security clearance. But I stumbled, that's the way these things happen, I guess, across a memo in the files of Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was a top scientist and Roosevelt scientific advisor and supposedly a member of MJ-12. He would have to have been because he was the right guy. And there was a letter in his files from a lawyer thanking him for helping get Donald Menzel off of charges of disloyalty. There were big hearings held. And that shook me up. I called the lawyer, wondering, what the heck is this all about? And the lawyer said, yes, there's about 1,000 pages at the Harvard archives, and the testimony, he was released, so to speak. They want to take away his high-level security clearance. And I'm thinking, what security clearance? You don't need a security clearance to teach astronomy at Harvard.
Right.
And so that led me to pursue it. I had to get permission from 3 different people to look at his papers at Harvard. And that's where I saw this letter and a lot of other material. He was a world-class cryptologist. And a few years ago, a paper was even published in a scientific journal, The Cryptologic Contributions of Donald Menzel. So that came as a very big surprise. And many people in ufology got mad at me. I had written a paper, The Double Life of Donald Menzel, And you can't, he couldn't have been a member of such a group. He was a debunker. And none of these people, as far as I can tell, have gone to the Harvard archives to look at the words that he said, the things that he did. But so finding that gave me confidence that there might be a lot of people who were doing the devil's work, if you will, that we didn't know about. And so I came to appreciate Menzel, believe it or not. Well, at least I could see why he was taking the view he was taking. And being a member of Majestic 12, and of course there's still people in ufology who haven't read my book, Top Secret Magic, who don't know how strong the case is for there having been a Majestic 12. And so we tried in the book to cover a lot of these, probably to some people, surprising angles, like Menzel being somebody very different from what we thought he was. I should add that there are two issues of Sky and Telescope, which is a very important magazine for, I'll call it, amateur astronomers, devoted to Donald Menzel. The first on the occasion of his death, and the second on the 100th anniversary of his birth. Neither one says anything about all his post-World War II highly classified work, which tells you that it was a very well-kept secret. And I mention this only because, and I'm sure Kathy gets this too, the government can't keep secrets. And those members of MJ-12, they would have all told their wives what they do. Well, I will say, I had a clearance for 14 years. I never told my wife anything classified, ever. It would be against the law. I could lose my job, etc. It's just the wrong thing to do. You just don't do it. But Menzel, and when I asked his wife, I talked to his wife. This is after his death, of course. And she said she knew nothing about his classified work. I talked to his secretary, who had a clearance in order to handle his classified material. She knew that he did classified work, but she wasn't very forthcoming about anything about UFOs or anything like that. But security is something, because I spent 14 years and I know a lot about. I wrote classified documents. I did one study. I never even was able to keep a copy of my final report. It was too classified and too restricted. I wish I had it, as a matter of fact, but I don't, and I would never have kept a copy of something like that. I mean, you just don't do that sort of thing. So that has been a big incentive for me. And also, I think there's something I'll mention. Nobody else really plays up the role of Air Force General Carol Bolender, engineer, and he wrote the memo that resulted in the closure of Project Blue Book. And we didn't see this memo. It was written in, like, 69. We didn't see it until 1979. I think it was released by accident, frankly. But in which he made the astonishing claim that reports of UFOs which could affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system. Now, one would have thought that they would have been the main focus of the Blue Book system.
Absolutely.
And he also said that if we close Project Blue Book, this is in this memo that he wrote that resulted in the closure of Project Blue Book, he also said that the public will have no place to report UFO sightings if Project Blue Book is closed. However, as previously noted, reports which could affect national security will continue to be investigated using the procedures designed for that purpose. Now, for how many years has the Air Force been saying there was no security angle here? We haven't been doing anything about UFOs? Well, maybe it's true. It was done by Operation Majestic 12. But that's the question. If they didn't go to the Air Force, where the heck did they go? And I think MJ-12, Majestic 12, provides a very convenient explanation for that. So we try to weave all this stuff together in the book.
Yeah. Question I have for you, this is for you, Stan, and that is, I've heard you say a number of times that, it's pretty obvious the government is covering this topic up, basically, and I agree.
Cosmic Watergate.
Yeah, right. But the question I have for you, what do you think about what they actually know about what's going on? I mean, do you think they're just as puzzled as the rest of us, or do you think they know something that we don't know?
Well, I think you don't keep secrets by telling everybody and hoping nobody tells what they know. You tell as few people as possible, and they have to have an appropriate, very high-level security clearance and an appropriate need to know. I think there are some few people. In other words, I don't want to say the government knows this or that. There are some few people within the government that know the whole story, that know what we've learned from aliens that have been recovered in crash saucers, that know what technological secrets we've picked up along the way, that know what kind of measurements have been made of aircraft chasing UFOs with instrumentation. But these aren't things that you go telling everybody. That's not how the system works. So I think there's some few people that know a great deal. And I'm tending to believe the story about Ike having met with aliens out at Holloman Air Force Base after Campbell talked to a crew member of Ike's plane when he was president, when he was supposedly playing golf in Georgia and was flown out to Holloman, and his plane was at one end of the field and the UFO was at the other end. I tend to believe that, but what I have no idea of is what went on. What was the agreement? We're going to see you guys for lunch, or we will agree not to shoot at you if you don't collaborate. I have no idea. There's plenty of room for investigation here, and what I'm hoping, one of the reasons for doing this book, I have sensed, I've done over 700 lectures, so I get a lot of feedback. I once figured I'd answered 60,000 questions, and that was a few years back. But the question comes up then, what does it all mean? And I still don't know. I'd like to find out while I'm still alive. Maybe there's a way to reach it from the other side, but I don't know that.
Yeah.
So I think there are some few people, not only in our own government, but in other governments. But as I started to say, the attitude has changed in the sense that partly because of the Kepler satellite, we now know that there are planets all over the darn place. There wasn't too many years that you could get away with saying, well, I don't know if there's any other solar system. We don't have any evidence. Now, Frank Drake, sort of to his credit, a number of years ago said there might be as many as 10,000 places in the galaxy that could be sending us radio signals. He didn't answer the question as to why they would do that. But now, it appears that there are between 1 and 1.6 planets per star. That means that within 100 light years of here, which is just down the street, so to speak, there are 10,000 stars and therefore at least 10,000 planets. I'm not saying they all have life. Look, baseball players get paid a lot of money for getting a hit 30% of the time. You don't say that it's terrible because 70% of the time he didn't get a hit. So you don't say that, well, since most sightings can be explained, therefore all can be. That's ridiculous. But that many planets, I never anymore hear the notion that we're the only ones around. Also, we know that there are stars that have other stars close by. We're out in the boonies. The next star is 4.3 light years. There are stars, in the case of Betty and Barney Hill, the star out there, the base star seems to be 1/8 of a light year apart. That's more than 30 times closer to each other. I would expect that the probability of developing interstellar travel goes up as you have a next-door neighbor, so to speak, as opposed to somebody across the county. Only makes sense. So this change in attitude, and the Pope has even talked, or guys that work with the Pope have said that they would baptize an alien if they were asked to do that. They didn't laugh. So what I'm saying is the acceptance of the notion of other life out there if you go back to the Hill experience in 1961, the attitude has surely changed a very great deal since then.
Yes.
Don't you think so, Kathy?
Yes, absolutely.
Kathy, I
think there's a far broader acceptance today than there was then.
Yes. Kathy, I have a question here, too, on the message board for you. But just finishing that thought, Stan, about the government or some compartmentalized part of the government having knowledge, how would you think that would be passed down generational through like a branch of the government? In other words, from Roswell till now without escaping, leaking, or anything?
Secrets are easy to keep. Two things. You need the appropriate clearance, and you need, what's the word I want here? A need to know is the simplest expression. There's probably a fancier phrase than that. And look, Lockheed spent over $10 billion to develop the stealth aircraft in secret. The Corona spy satellite, our first one, there were 12 failures in secret. We heard nothing about those. For 30 years, it got more, the first successful one got more data than all the U-2 spy planes had obtained in the years preceding it. There was no announcement about the reality of the Corona spy satellite for 30 years. A lot of people to build a satellite and handle the data and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So secrets aren't that difficult to keep if you make an effort to keep them. Now, sometimes you say, hey, no sense keeping that secret anymore. Everybody knows, you know. When the first atom bomb was tested, Trinity site in New Mexico, in July of 45, it was seen from 100 miles away. It was rather a spectacular event. And people were calling the sheriff's offices. And the cover story was put in the paper. An ammunition dump had blown up, and fortunately nobody was injured. It was only after we dropped the 2 bombs on Japan that, oh yeah, you know, what people saw was a nuclear explosion, first one.
It seems to me it would be a really big burden to carry if you knew that there was life elsewhere. It just seems like it would be such a hard secret to keep. It's so important.
Well, wait a minute. You just hit the thing. It's important to keep it. Look at all the people who worked on the Manhattan Project. General Groves, who directed the project, never told his wife what he was doing, and she didn't find out. It's kind of funny. Somebody in his office at the Pentagon called her on August, I believe it was the 6th, 1945, suggesting she ought to listen to the radio at noon that day. And so she did, and they announced that the first atomic bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima, and the war would soon be over. And she thought that was the reason, because she had a son. She and the general had a son who was due to be sent to the Pacific to fight over there. And she thought that they were being nice, and they, you know, it would be nice to know that your son isn't going to be involved in a horrible invasion of Japan. The last line of the program said, this incredible program to develop an atomic bomb was under the direction of General Leslie Groves. That's when she found out what he'd been doing for the previous 2 years, mind you. So, yes, secrets can be kept. And, you know, you don't trust people unless you have a reason. They've gone through a security clearance. You've checked on their background. You've checked on their families. The record, it isn't just a notation of a pen by somebody saying, oh, I think that guy is honest. We can trust him. It's a long, difficult procedure, and especially for very highly classified stuff.
I would like to add, too, that it is a crime for military personnel to discuss classified UFO reports with unauthorized persons. And so if you were to do so, you faced a $10,000 fine and prison term. So that's something that is held over your head as well. And
plus
I think
loss of pension, I've heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
And VA
there
benefits,
are consequences.
Right. So,
yeah.
I can kind of understand. It just seems like it would be such a tough secret, something that important to keep. But, I have heard, for instance, Ben from Fact or Faked, Ben Hansen, said his grandfather basically, at the very end of his life, told his son, Ben's father, that we're not alone. And it was like a secret he had to get off his chest at the very end.
Yeah, that's when you hear it.
Yeah.
Deathbed confessions.
Interesting. Kathy, I have a question from the message board for you. And since you and Denise Stoner produced the commonality study, have any other intriguing commonalities been observed? In other words, have you discovered more commonalities than you were?
We have discovered more commonalities. We have an expanded 118 question study going on at MUFON.com right now. It's the experiencer survey. And just let me throw out one thing that I was really astounded by. And we don't have all the results in yet. So I couldn't give the statistics anyway because the study isn't completed. But I was surprised at the high number of individuals who reported bed walking, which you also find in paranormal cases. But there was quite a high percentage of individuals who would be on their beds and they would feel something invisible walking around on the bed, beside them, on top of them sometimes. And so I thought that was quite interesting. And
wow.
I'm hoping to have, within the next few months, I'm hoping to have the results of the new study out. But I need everybody's help who's listening. If you're an experiencer, please complete the experiencer, not questionnaire, survey.
Where do they find it, Kathy?
It's at MUFON.com. It is on the main page. Just scroll down to the ERT, Experiencer Research Team.
Okay, getting back to the book, I wanted to also congratulate Stan for that $1,000 check that you got from Phil Glass. I remember you telling the story about that. I see it published here again.
It's a story worth telling because not everybody knows about it. Okay, Phil Glass, who was certainly a nasty, noisy negativist, when I mentioned Majestic 12, one of the documents was just a short document that was found at the National Archives, and he said, obviously it's a fraud. It has the word NSC, the initials NSC on the National Security Council. And he said, look, it's done in the large pica type, but the NSC only used the small elite type. And here's 9 documents to prove that, and I challenge me to find any other documents with the same size and style type and meeting a rather long list of qualifications of their kind of signatures and so forth and so on. And I will pay you, showing that I'm putting my money where my mouth is, I will pay you $100 each up to a maximum of 10. And you got 60 days. It was a ridiculous offer, but I'll tell you why in a minute. Anyway, I went to my files first thing, and I got loads of material because I've spent a lot of time at the Eisenhower Library. And I immediately found 20 documents with the large pica type, but they didn't meet all his criteria. But he allowed 2 and thought he was getting away scot-free. Well, I was planning on going to the Eisenhower Library, and so I went within the allotted time frame and picked out 14 that met all his criteria, made copies, sent him an invoice for $1,000 because he set a limit of 10, unfortunately. And I sent him the invoice and the documents, and he paid me. He had told everybody about challenging me, but nobody about paying me. And one of the things that Kathy found when she visited the archives in the American Philosophical Society library, which has his papers. She mentioned that before. One of the things that was rather surprising is there was no Stanton Friedman file. Even though he and I corresponded for more than 20 years. I wonder if he really didn't want anybody to know that he paid me. Anyway, when I published a copy of the check in one of my books, he hit the ceiling. He threatened to sue me. And
for what?
Really angry for publishing that check. And I had put a black marks through some of the check information so nobody could cheat him, I guess. And so I wrote him back a letter saying, Phil, you sent me a check. I Xeroxed it. I took it to the bank. They cashed it. I can do whatever I darn please with that Xerox. And he didn't say anything more. But it's in the book, and when I use it at my lectures, I always can guarantee you a laugh. The thing is, you got to put your money where your mouth is. And so Phil was saying he always did, but until he paid me, he hadn't put any of his money. And the interesting thing I found out, the most shocking thing, is that he had never, and this was after this, he had never been to the Eisenhower Library. And here he was saying they have 250,000 pages of National Security Council material there. And he was saying they're all done on the same typewriter. He didn't know how many there were, of course. He had 9 that he got by mail. This is typical of the intellectual bankruptcy of the pseudoscience of anti-ufology. Kathy's heard me say that 27 times.
More than that.
Well, 67 times, whatever. But it's still true. And one of my basic rules, and Kathy's rule too, is have facts in hand before putting mouth or pen in gear. And we really feel that more people in ufology on both sides of the fence would do that. Do your homework. That's the lesson there.
This part on Class and the Travis Walton case is pretty interesting, and maybe, Kathy, you can talk a little bit about that. And also, I remember speaking to Steve Pierce, who said that Class offered him, and maybe I'm getting this wrong, but offered him $10,000 if he would say the whole thing was a lie.
Yes.
Did you ever hear of that?
Story.
Yes.
Yes.
I certainly did. And that's one thing that I was looking for at the American Philosophical Society. What I found is that Class had a very thick folder of information on the Walton case. He had corresponded with everybody, made telephone calls, and he would transcribe the way that he apparently wanted the conversation to have gone, because he was accused over and over again of lying when he transcribed what people had said. And he, from the day one when he got in on this investigation, was hell-bent on destroying not only the validity of this case, but the people who were involved in this case as well. And poor Travis Walton, 22 years old, and really in a state of shock after he was returned, was just ripped to ribbons by Class. And, he was accused of lying. His entire family was accused of lying. They challenged Class and said, look, my family and all of the members of the logging crew, everyone who was there and involved in this case, wants to take lie detector testing to prove that we are telling the truth. And Class agreed to it initially. He said that he would pay for it, and that as long as they could find a mutually agreeable lie detector tester, polygraph examiner, who would conduct the lie detector tests. So they went back and forth. There was someone who was a very, very good polygraph examiner, but class kept finding problems with them. Well, maybe that person had too much information about UFOs. Maybe that person might believe that UFOs were real. And then of course, class knew a lot about the characteristics of polygraph exams, and that you can persuade the person who is taking the test to do poorly on it if you antagonize that person, if you are there because what it does is it tests one's level of emotions, and not necessarily whether or not you're telling the truth. So if a person is stressed because they're being antagonized, they could fail the exam. But what class decided that he wanted to do is he wanted to be there and be present during the polygraph exam. And I think that his reason for doing that was that he wanted to antagonize those witnesses. Well, he ended up not funding it. The deal was that he was going to fund it if they failed. He was going to fund it if they passed, and they were going to fund it if they failed. That's the way it went, but it never did take place. Of course, other polygraph examiners did give multiple exams to Travis and to Travis's brother and to a member of the crew who had originally taken the test, but the results were equivocal because he had walked out during the exam, so they didn't really have a result. They all took tests after that and passed.
Was that Dallas?
Yes, that was Alan Dallas. Mm-hmm. And so after that, other things they tried to do. Well, class just found out that Travis Walton had a puncture wound on the backside of his elbow. And so immediately he looked for a reason for that puncture wound. And what kind of drugs might he have been injecting to cause him to hallucinate this experience? And the doctors ended up finding out that the puncture wound was not over a vein. It was a puncture wound that looked like it probably had been caused by a tree branch or something like that. But class insisted that, he just missed the vein and it went into the muscle. It was just absolutely ridiculous, but it was one thing after another. Class knew the truth about a lot of this case from the people that he had interviewed. He interviewed the owner of the factory where Travis Walton had worked when he was a teenager. The factory owner liked him. Travis spent cold nights visiting their house sometimes, spent the night. He was a friend of the factory owner's son. But class turned that all around and twisted it to make it look as if Travis was some kind of a criminal. And it happened over and over again. And this is not unusual. I give many, many examples in the book of not only Travis Walton, but in the case of Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum north of Houston, and also the Lonnie Zamora case as well. All of class's insidious attempts to discredit these individuals, and these attempts were dishonest attempts.
Yes. Someone is trying to call into the show. For some reason, the Skype is not working to allow me to add them to the call. So if you're calling and you hear me, I'm sorry, can't take your call. If you'd like to ask a question in a chat room, feel free to jump on podcastufo.com and log in to the chat room and send a question in. Right now,
or
I'm sorry, though,
three.
I cannot. Yeah, or 2 or 3. Can't add you to that. Stan, earlier you said that no one was more blatant than Menzel. What did you mean by that?
Well, look, he wrote 3 books. One of the very few scientists, 3 debunking books, and always came up with explanations that made no sense. And as we say in the book, Kathy went over this quite carefully. When he met with the Air Force, they weren't buying it. He said he had an explanation for all these cases, and they had no reason to believe him. But he came on very, very strong, taking advantage of his status at Harvard. And it was only after I found out about his encounter with having his clearance pulled and all this stuff that I kind of felt sorry for him. And then when I found out that he was on the inside, this MJ-12 stuff, then I appreciated his work. Secrecy is one of those things that's important because in both directions. Burgess, Philby, and McLean, for example, were 3 Englishmen who unfortunately were Russian spies, even though they worked in British intelligence. Now, that takes a lot of double-lifing, if you will, so nobody knows where the information got leaked from and stuff like that. There are examples of people leading a double life, but Menzel's being one of them was something that came as quite a shock to me. And what can I say? I started to respect him for that. And I had one encounter with him. I'll tell it very quickly. I was speaking at Harvard to a group of engineering alumni of Harvard, and I had no idea how much publicity they'd given outside their own group. So I came on campus earlier in the day, and I called Menzel to invite him. And I told him who I was. "Oh, I know all about you," he said, which came as a shock. Only because of some work that Kathy did did I find out what that meant. But he said, "You can't be a scientist and believe in flying saucers." And I laughed. What could I do? And he got angry. And he started to rant, and I said, "Look, Dr. Menzel, I didn't call to argue with you. I called out of courtesy. I'm speaking on your campus. I have no idea what publicity has gone out besides the group that I'm speaking to, because you never know. I just wanted to make sure you knew that I'd be here at 8 o'clock at such and such a hall." "Oh, well, of course I won't attend." And that didn't impress me very well, but here's a great professor saying you can't be a scientist and believe in flying saucers. So the Menzel stuff was important because he was a bellwether for the nasty, noisy negativists. But we know that he was an insider, and I guarantee you that practically nobody knew of his high-level security clearance, his activities for the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, NSC, etc. He really did lead a double life, and he died with nobody knowing about it. And there was an article in the Center for UFO Studies publication that I wrote about the double life of Donald Menzel, and a lot of people were very upset with me. It can't be. And one of the things that I found interesting was these hearings that were held. 1950, communists under every bed, and sometimes 2 under a bed. There was nothing in the New York Times or the Washington Post about that. This is when everybody was complaining about commies, pinkos, et cetera, et cetera. And I was surprised that there was nothing about that. And I wonder who was responsible for that. You thought the press had been camped at the door, but they weren't. Or if they were, nobody was printing anything.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about one of your chapters in the media, the press. But one thing I was really fascinated to read about was the astronomers and UFOs, how there's claims that no astronomer has ever seen a UFO. And the point that, I don't know who wrote this particular chapter, but the point was that astronomers are sitting in a chair, very targeted, looking at a very targeted area, while amateur astronomers, like the one that used to be on this show, did see a UFO, and a lot of them do see UFOs because they're out in the open sky. Never thought of it that way, but that does make total sense.
It's true, and as a matter of fact, the Allegheny Observatory in Pittsburgh, I think, over umpteen years, had one picture that might have been an airplane going by. The field of view of a telescope is very, very small, and people have this picture of astronomers waving the telescope around to look around and see what's there. That's not what they do at all. The instruments aren't designed to be done. They have to be very specially mounted. And they have a pre-selected target. And these days, certainly, they're computer-controlled so that you can get pictures of what you want to get pictures of. And you could be surrounded by aliens and flying saucers, and nobody would know it. You're not going to see them looking through the telescope. I mean, it's one of those myths.
You know, I was looking at Andromeda through an observatory at a college about 5 years ago, and when I was looking up the odds of this happening are so slight, but a meteor went across the lens, and it darn near blinded me and made me, like, jump. I almost fell off the stool, everything.
Well, but you get what I mean. That
yes.
You don't see much of the sky.
Right. A very tiny, tiny little bit. Now, one of your chapters, Chapter 10, a hard look at the media, the UFO community, and the trend towards sensationalism. Can you just, either one of you take that? Kind of the gist.
Well, I think we both can, but we both contributed to that chapter, as we did to many of the chapters in the book. But we covered some of the positive aspects of the media, but also some of the negative things that have happened as well. And for example, one of those was a television show that Stanton did, and this was up in Canada. What was it, Toronto, Stan?
In Toronto, yes.
In Toronto.
The Schulman Show, the Schulman Files.
Yes, the Mort Schulman Show. And it was incredible the way Mort Schulman, who was actually a medical doctor, showed incredible disrespect for Stanton and asked him questions like, have you ever been diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder? Have you ever spent time in a mental hospital? Do you have any scientific training whatsoever? And of course, Stan did a wonderful job defending himself and saying, of course, I've never been to a psychiatrist. I've never been. He kept his cool, actually. I wouldn't have.
I was surprised when I saw that.
Yes, I've never been in a psychiatric hospital. And then he listed his degrees from the University of Chicago and all the little industries that he had worked for, such as GE and Aerojet General and on
GM.
and on. Yes, GM, and then the scientific organizations that he belongs to, and sort of Mort Schulman just ended up saying he's a crazy scientist, and then went on to a man who was not a scientist, but who was a college professor of philosophy. He was a secular humanist and one of the founders of what we call SICOP, and along with Philip Klass. But Schulman treated him as if he were the scientist and said, now tell us, what does the scientific community think about this? It was very, very slanted. in the way it was treated. And I do think that Philip Klass was in part responsible for the media's interpretation and understanding of all of this. When I was looking in Klass's files, there were letters from Edward Condon. And in one of those letters, Condon had written a recommendation to McGraw-Hill, to Phil Klass's boss, and recommended that Klass should be the go-to guy if the media wanted an expert on UFOs. And he said, don't listen to the foibles of people like Professor James McDonald, who is probably the greatest scientist ever to have lived, who studied UFOs and did a fantastic job on what he did. A meteorological physicist at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And Phil Klass went after him viciously. It was one of the 3 individuals that Klass spent a lot of time attempting to destroy. Stan was another one. But so that was the kind of thing that Klass did. He got in there and he spread his disinformation to the American public through newspaper articles, through magazines, through television programs, and through radio programs.
And letters to the FBI.
He was on a letter writing campaign, and he made himself sound very official. For example, you might have heard about this before, but Klass warned the Hertzberg Institute of Astrophysics at the National Research Council in Ottawa, Canada, that they had a ufologist of the snake oil salesman variety moving
I read that.
From California to Canada, and they ought to beware of him and his activities. It was quite a long letter, but it was certainly slanderous. But Stan hadn't known about it until Rich Dolan found it when he was up there doing research. It was he was everywhere. I'm just amazed that.
Look what he said about Hynek.
Like an octopus. Pardon me?
Look what he said about Hynek.
Oh, absolutely. That was another one where Hynek had written a paper, a journal article for the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, and it was on UFOs and some of the mistakes that people make, the public's assumption being wrong. And actually, it was Phil Klass who was giving that incorrect information to the public. But Klass was very upset about this, and he called the FBI, and he also wrote letters to the FBI. And the FBI wrote, quote, in strong terms laced with sarcasm. Klass said that Hynek is the spiritual leader of the vocal group of believers and kooks who claim that we are being visited by extraterrestrial spaceships. The FBI has given its endorsement to a hoax that UFOs are of extraterrestrial origin, and to a fraud, Dr. Hynek, which really didn't set well with the FBI, because they were very well acquainted with Hynek and knew that he was at the top of his field. And so they said that Klass was informed that Hynek is a highly respected scientist, recognized by all creditable professionals in his field of expertise, who is affiliated with a leading university. And Klass's answer to that is, he won't be for long. Now,
I mean, it was incredible.
It was. It really was. And I think that was because Klass had a little spy up there, at Northwestern University who was taking astronomy classes from Hynek and was reporting back to class with anything that class might be able to use in order to destroy Hynek's reputation. Well, the FBI stood up for Hynek, too, and wrote that class's attempts to discredit Hynek are totally without foundation. Hynek could scarcely have any better scientific credentials. All his writings and public statements that were examined prior to his publication disclose a meticulously objective and scientific view of the UFO phenomenon. And they had no such kind remarks to make about Philip Klass. They said that they should be circumspect in any further dealings with him.
Well, that's it for the free part of the show. Thank you for listening. And if you'd like to listen to the whole show, all you have to do is support us for $2 or more a month. That information is on podcastufo.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week. Keep your eyes to the sky.